Good morning. Thank you so much for being here this morning. Lamar, I'm going to let him just jump right into this history. He's got a lot. We'll get you out of here by Tuesday of next week. But Lamar, come on up. He's worked hard on this, and I know he's talked to a lot of people and done a lot of research, and I'm just going to let him jump right into it.
Thank you, Owen. As you can see on the slide, we're celebrating 135 years of Tuckaleechee Church. Methodism had been active in Tuckaleechee Cove for close to 100 years before this church was actually founded. So some of the families that were here by 1820, which was 70 years before this church, were Snyders, Dunns, McCampbells, Lawsons, Hanleys, Myers, Tiptons, Webb, Burns, and Davis. As you see the windows on each side of the church, you see some of those names. Before Tuckaleechee was founded as a church, or we began our history of 1891, Methodists gathered as societies here in the Cove. There were some records kept. There was camp meetings. There was an old church called Mount Pleasant that was around in 1831, and the Holston Conference, which our church is a member, was actually formed in 1834. So Methodists were active in Tuckaleechee Cove even before the conference. Some of the names of people that were active in the societies, you probably can't read it, but you see some of the names in the windows. Up at the top, there's 3 names there, and one is W.R. Snyder. I've always heard of him as Bob Snyder. He was a grandson of Peter Snyder, who was the first European settler in Tuckaleechee Cove as a permanent settler. His father and his grandfather were very active in the early days of the church. And his sister, Dolly Snyder Dunn, is in the window over there. So this has been a little bit of a repeat of something I did about a year ago, but today we're going to take a different tact. Then we talked about the laity through the years from 1891 to around 1960. But today we'll talk about the clergy from 1862 to 2026, but predominantly from 1890 to 2026. This slide shows a list of ministers who was here during that early time, and then the list of ministers from 1890 to present day, Owen and Leslie here at 2025. We have in the group Brenda, Carol, and Larry, and Brenda was here for a while just before the Raglins. But we will take a look at about 10 different ministers during the life of this church. The first guy was I.P. Martin. He was born in 1867 up in Jefferson County, and he was licensed to preach in 1888. So he was assigned to the Maryville district 2 years later. And as a part of that, he was assigned to Tuckaleechee and Cades Cove. He wrote a book, or a couple of books, really. Does anyone in this room know of a place in Townsend or Tuckaleechee Cove called Tater Hill? I see no hands. Here's some hands. I was wondering if Jerry was going to do that. His dad used to play baseball down there. But anyway, in his book, I.P. Martin talks about riding his horse Charlie on his first trip to Tuckaleechee. And the first families that he met was Colonel Tipton. But he was talking about the family and how he was welcomed, and how two of the sons actually went with him up on Rich Mountain to get him properly directed to Cades Cove. And he talked about a widowed lady who was a daughter of Colonel Tipton. And a year ago, when I did a similar thing to this, I had a picture of the granddaughter who was a strong member of this church as long as she lived, Ellie Webb, who lived in the middle of Townsend. But people that I.P. Martin talked about in his book was Colonel Tipton, Henry Webb, who is over in that window, and Johnny McCampbell is in this window over here. As he described Henry Webb, he and his wife had no children, but they welcomed all the kids of Tuckaleechee Cove into their home, and she was known as quite a cook. He ran a grocery store, or a general store, I suppose, in those days. They lived on one side of Little River and the store was on the other. And I don't know which side of the river which was. But Henry Webb was a very strong early member of this church. The known charter members of this church, and you see I have here Tuckaleechee Chapel Church. For probably 75 years after it was established, people in the community referred to this as Tuckaleechee Chapel. My maternal grandmother never called it anything other than the chapel. But you can see this list of charter members One is Richard Barnes, who is back in the back corner. Louisa Tipton Dunn, who was the daughter of Colonel Tipton, who married the brother of William Hurst Dunn over there. William Dunn is in the window. Rachel Lawson was the first person buried in a cemetery, and she was the daughter of William Hurst and Dolly Dunn. Rachel Lawson was another daughter of those folks. Delia Dunn McCampbell was a daughter, the oldest daughter of that couple. Reverend John McCampbell was the son of Johnny McCampbell. And Colonel Tipton and Henry Webb generally won that group out. Here is a picture of the completed church, and it was dedicated the fourth Sunday of May in 1894. That date just came about very recently. My cousin Nelson, who some of you know, researches old Maryville Times papers, and he saw a clipping in 1894 that identified the naming of the church and when it was dedicated. So that's a bit of somewhat new information as far as we're concerned. Here's a map that is a United States Geological Survey map that was probably a 1950 something vintage map. And you can see on the map, the church is identified as Tuckaleechee Chapel. So the name stuck for quite a while. After I.P. Morton, I've selected Bob Snyder. There was a feud between I.P. Morton and Bob Snyder. But Bob was raised here in the Cove. He was a homegrown minister. He served for 45 years in the conference, 13 circuits, 11 stations. He was admitted to the conference in 1883 and died in 1928. And as I said earlier, Dolly Snyder was his sister. Bob served here in the 1880s. We've had a few other homegrown ministers here, and there's some of you that will know most of them. And Preacher John McCampbell, who was the son of Johnny McCampbell over there, who we'll talk about a little bit later, served this church 3 different times during his ministry as a minister, and then as a member served many, many years. In 1958-9 timeframe, a couple of guys who were attending church here decided they wanted to go into the ministry. And a local member, some of you knew D.H. Tipton, formerly with Little River Lumber Company, funded their education, and they began at Hiawassee College in the fall of 1959. Jack Mosier and Hugh Decker. Jack retired back to this church. Most of you probably knew Jack and his wife Faye. She was raised in this church. In fact, you could trace her lineage all the way back to the deed of the property for this church was a Cameron. Another guy that's listed here is sitting back in the back corner, Stan Johnson. Another one is William Brickey. William had told me he was going to be here, but I don't see him. Maybe he's somewhere. William, I saw him last weekend, and he was in a wheelchair, so he may have decided not to navigate in the wheelchair today. The next minister that we'll talk about was Preacher John McCampbell. He was born in 1872 and died in 1962. As I said earlier, he served 3 different times as minister to this church. And after that time, he served as a faithful member until his death. Preacher John was married twice. First time, the first wife died of cancer. He also had a son who drowned up in Little River in a place that some of you would know as the McKelder Hole. Later, he married Mame Huffstetler, and some of you older folks would remember Miss Mame McCampbell. She was very active in the church. When he passed away, he had 3 surviving members of his family. He and Mame passed away within an hour or so of each other on the same day. And neither knew that the other had passed. Preacher John was a multitasking kind of guy. He was a Methodist minister. He was a mail carrier. He was a farmer. He was a carpenter. And a very devout Tuckaleechee Chapel member. History has it that he made these arches for the windows, and he made these pulpits. There is some history that was written that he did this altar rail, but I think, if my memory is right, that altar rail was actually built after he passed away. Here's a picture of him when they were building the parsonage over there, and you can see the church in the background. So that picture indicates how involved he was in everything that went on in this church. That construction was probably 1951, 52 time frame. Here's a picture of he and his family in the early 1950s. You can see his wife Mame on the right, his son Emery on the left, Emery's wife Mary, and their son Blake. A lot of you knew Blake. He passed away not too many years ago. I remember Blake back in the days of this picture when the two of us sat back in the back row and Larry Carroll wanted to know if I listened. Part of the time, at least anyway. Preacher Dunn was also a historian. Those of you that know much about local history, Inez Burns is somewhat recognized as a local historian. She wrote a book of the history of Blount County. And this is a letter that Preacher John wrote her in 1950 as to the membership, the purchase of the land, and so forth of the church. We could spend the rest of the day talking about Preacher John, but we need to move on. The next minister that is in this group that we're talking about was Paul Worley. Paul was a young minister that served here in 1934 and 1936. He initiated the construction of this building here, the stone building. And he came back on numerous occasions for various reasons. And he was the speaker here for the 90th anniversary of the church. Paul, as a lot of other young ministers who was in this church, actually moved on to rather significant pulpits in the conference. In the 60s, if my recollection is correct, he was the minister at Church Street in Knoxville, which probably at that time was the premier pulpit in the conference.
Lamar, this is a significant pulpit too. I just want to remind you.
Well, Larry, I'm actually going to get to that. And since you brought it up, and we'll get to your partner a little later, but through the history, many young preachers, as I said, moved upward in a conference and had some fairly important, or at least in their thoughts, pulpits. Steve Sallee being one was at Cokesbury, and I suppose when he was there, it was probably the largest church in the conference. And then there was a guy who kind of passed through here a year or so ago that was actually on the staff at Cokesbury called Larry Carroll. But we'll get to Brenda in a little bit. But Brenda actually did this in reverse. She had that major pulpit. She was a district superintendent. And then she comes to Tuckaleechee. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So at least on one occasion, we did have, at the present time, a senior pastor that had been through the trials. Work began on this building, and the building committee was Preacher John, the son of that guy, Dunn, the son of those folks, Earl McCampbell, which was a grandson of those folks, Will Lawson. The finance committee, as I mentioned, was Ellie Webb, who was the granddaughter of Colonel Tipton, Jim McCampbell, Mike Dunn, John Bryant. This is a picture of this church when it was finished in 1942. And if you noticed, out front is a pile of rocks. The sign out front was actually built out of that pile of rocks. Now, they were there in 1942. Delmer Kaler, who's sitting back here in the back, his dad stacked those up and built that sign that's out there today. You notice there is no steeple on this church. The steeple that you see outside today was probably put up there in the 70s. When was it put up there? If I remember right, Buddy Burris designed that steeple, and that would have had to have been in the 60s. So it would have been at least 20 years after this picture. Here is a picture in 1942 of this sanctuary. And you see on the left side over there is a piano. We're fortunate today to have a lady sitting back in the back that actually played that piano during the 1940s. Wilma Douglas. Wilma's dad was very active in this church, and obviously she was as well. And it's good to have Wilma here with us today. If you look closely, just to the other side of that pulpit where the organ is today, you see the top of a pew that's turned perpendicular to these. Those of you that have memories as Wilma and I, that was called the Amen Corner. Preacher John sat in that Amen Corner every Sunday. Generally, nobody but Preacher John sat in the Amen Corner. But that was his place until he wasn't able to come anymore. The next minister that we will talk about is Ephraim Keebler. He was the last minister here to live in the old parsonage. And the old parsonage was on the bank across the road from Campground Church. He had four churches in his charge. He had Tuckaleechee, Campground, Wallen, and Walker's Chapel. And if you don't know where Walker's Chapel was, if you know where the Melrose Bridge is across Little River, just upstream on the Old Road side is where that church was, and there's a cemetery there now. His daughter-in-law was actually minister here for a few months, a year or so ago. And Mary Ann and I were here one Sunday, and I heard her name was Keebler, and as we left the church, I said, I knew another minister called Keebler here. She said, that was my father-in-law. Now remember, he was here in the 40s. And I said, "You're not old enough to be daughter-in-law of Buford Keebler." She said, "Oh yeah, my husband's old." So some of you that was here during that time knew Bob, Buford's son, her husband. Bob is prince of a guy. I'd hoped that he could be here today, but it didn't pan out. Here's a picture of that old parsonage. When the new road got built through Townsend, it took that parsonage away. And they moved it up near the middle of Townsend. And Bob told me a couple of years ago that he spotted that old building and went to visit it to reminisce when he actually lived in it at a different location. And the people welcomed him in and took him all through the house and so forth. So those of you that have connections to the Lale family, Miss Nola Lale lived in that house where it presently sits. This is a picture of Janice Keebler, the daughter-in-law of Buford Keebler.
Lamar, I believe Janice and Bob will be trying to make it up for lunch.
Okay. Be good to see both of them. The next minister that we will highlight is John Weichel. John was here very active for 4 years. His circuit included the campground, Tuckaleechee and Wallen. John was active in building the parsonage that's here now. And as I understand it, he actually did one at Wallen at the same time. And as I said, Wallen, campground, and Tuckaleechee were on his circuit. But Wallen, at the end of his ministry, went as a full charge ministry. So the next minister after Weichel didn't have Wallen and the campground. The site of the parsonage over there was wooded with good-sized pine trees. And the local laity here cut those trees. A church member had a sawmill, and the logs were cut into lumber, and you can see a stack of it behind the sign with John Weichel standing by it. That sawmill was out in Dry Valley, and this is a picture of them actually sawing those logs. Here's a picture of John holding the first 2x4. I don't remember this sermon, but the story goes that he used that 2x4 in his sermon the next Sunday as a prop. But that picture was actually made at the sawmill. And you can see in the background, there's an old D John Deere tractor that was actually the source of power to run the sawmill. Following John Weichel was, before that, the highlights of his ministry was John had several revivals during the time that he was here, and the number of membership increased significantly, and particularly young people. John's wife, Wanda, they were a young couple that really stirred among the whole community. Didn't matter whether they were Tuckaleechee folks or not. And Wanda had a slide camera, and she made pictures of families all through this valley. And some of them are still available here in the church. And that picture of the sawmill obviously was one that Wanda made. And John returned on a lot of occasions for various reasons. He was here for the 90th celebration of the church. Following John Wacko was Kimmer Phillips, Morgan. He served here from 55 to 57, and he was the first minister that was where Tuckaleechee was a charge unto itself and no other church. So this was his only pulpit. He was a World War II veteran. He was ordained in 1951, and he was here in 1955. So he was another one of those young ministers. Marianne and I had the good fortune of having Morgan and his family as ministers at Logan's Chapel when we moved back to Blount County in the early 70s. Kathleen Phillips, his wife, was a very active lady in the church. And they began the effort to build the educational building that's off to my right and your left. So in order to put that building on a good start, they had a fundraising deal to raise $25,000 in 4 days. And since Wilma's here, I'll point out that Sam Hanley was her dad. He chaired the effort to fund that building. Another minister that has some reason to be highlighted today, at least in my mind, was Odell LaFont. Odell was not a World War II veteran. He was too young at the time of the war, but he was involved working at the time. He became a full conference connection minister in 1966. He was here at Tuckaleechee, and 5 years later, we still have Odell LaFont's spirit here almost every Sunday, maybe every Sunday. There's a lady sitting on the back row back there, that's Odell's daughter, that continues to be a member here and serve in many ways. He started the silent offering. Those that's here on silent offering Sunday know of Odell and how he started that program for scholarships for young folks. He replaced Boyd Randall. And you have to be connected several years ago for that connection to mean anything. But Randall died here in this sanctuary on a Sunday night, if I remember correctly. And Odell followed him and took over. According to a conversation I had with Miss Jean, he was a craftsman. These bulletin boards, Odell made those. And in the conference journal indicates that he was a craftsman and that he took walnut shells and made various things. And there's a little basket back in the educational building that's made out of walnut shells. I don't know that this is true, but it's a good story. Odell made that basket. My dad was generally fairly critical of most ministers. Odell LaFawn was not one of the guys that my dad was critical of. Those two guys were very close friends, right on up, as long as they were around each other. After he completed his ministry, Odell moved back to Dry Valley, attended this church, and his family continues to serve in this church. Laura Jean Myers Ross was the first female minister here. She served from 1987 to 1990. She returned for the 100th celebration of the church. Here is a picture of Laura Jean, John Weichel, Stuart Albee, and Drew Henry. Drew was another minister that could very well have been included in this deal today, except time prohibited that. Stuart Albee was the minister at the 100th, and John Weichel came back for that event, and Laura Jean was here. The next person that is highlighted today is Ken Abbott. And I think I saw Ken come in somewhere. So if this picture doesn't mean anything, look in the very back corner. Ken served a long time here, from 2002 to 2011, 9 years, which was a little bit unheard of before that. He increased the attendance of the congregation. He was a family man. His wife, Mary, is with us today. He had 2 sons, one of which is here that I saw. And then after retirement, he migrated back to Tuckaleechee and is a extremely strong parishioner. We appreciate you, Ken.
You're the first for that.
Ken and I have crossed paths a lot of times over the years. After he left here, he went back home eventually to First Church, Maryville, where he was raised. Mary Ann and I were attending there then, so I saw Ken on a fairly regular basis. Mary and Mary Ann sang in a choir there together for years. And as far as I know, Mary's still singing in the choir there. But from my perspective, Ken was a transitional minister at Tuckaleechee. Before Ken, there was what I'd call the old guard, and there was a lot of new folks moving in Townsend. He was able to bring a lot of new folks into the church. Unfortunately, he lost a lot of members in that, as he put it to me one day we were talking, that he and I had buried a bunch of them. If I remember right, Ken was a minister on at least 5 funerals within my very close family. And Ken had a habit, at least with us, that I thought was unique, may or may not be. But after the internment in the cemetery, Ken took the family to the prayer room and had communion. I'll never forget that. More than once we did that. And you can pick Ken's brain at lunch about all the things I left. Then Brenda Carroll, again, was a minister that I said earlier was top down instead of bottom up. Brenda had served a lot of charges, had a lot of years of ministry, been a district superintendent, pastor at First Maryville, and then came to Tuckaleechee to fill in for a short period of time during what was a bit of a difficult situation. I talked to Brenda a few days ago and told her that I thought that her ministry here was a stabilizing force. Don't know that Brenda necessarily agreed with that, but her comment was that she got assigned to shepherd us through the issues with whatever came. And I think, at least from my perspective, she put stability where we needed stability. Brenda and Mariana, I have crossed paths, and Larry, numerous times over the last 60 years plus, I guess. Her first charge was the French Broad Circuit over in Knox County. And there was 3 churches in that charge. And Mary Ann's home church was one of them, Bethel Methodist Church. And I guess Brenda had been there maybe 2 or 3 months or 4, I don't know. And she had the duty of preaching Mary Ann's grandmother's funeral. So that was our early encounter with Brenda. Then we were parishioners at First Church, and they were, her and Larry as partner or a team's ministry for 11 years, which was a long time. So then we hear that Brenda's coming to Tuckaleechee. So again, it's old time stuff. We were glad to see the Carols coming. Now, Larry wasn't in the pulpit many times, but he did show up and actually did one of the Christmas services that he did a yeoman's job. He was a pretty decent preacher, believe it or not. So that concludes what I had. As I understand it, we'll have a little break, and then we'll go into the worship service. But I'm going to go into a sales mode. Here is 2 cookbooks that have been put together as this celebration. One is bound with a spiral binding, another is a loose leaf. Some people prefer a permanent binding. Some like a loose leaf to be able to add and subtract easily. I prefer the loose leaf, but most people aren't like me. Now, here comes the sales pitch. When we were researching the old recipes, and there's a group of recipes in here that came from what I would categorize as old contributors, from old cookbooks, so forth, but all of them members of this church. But there was a cookbook that we looked at that on the inside cover was a note that a mother gave the daughter that cookbook and dated it. What do you think the value of that cookbook is to that daughter? Now, some of you guys and gals have not only children, you've got grandchildren. And I would suggest that you think pretty seriously about getting a dozen or 2 of these and writing something in the inside cover about your relationship with that child or grandchild, or maybe even a great-grandchild or 2. Mary Ann's actually got the good fortune of having twin great-granddaughters. So, tell these folks how they can get one of these, a dozen of these.
First of all, can we show our appreciation to Lamar? Church will start at 11, so you've got about 35 minutes. If you'd like to come back into the assembly room, there's a wonderful display in there of old picture books and newspaper clippings, and the cookbooks are in there. We advertised them at $25, but then we came back and said, no, they're only $20. So you get and there are plenty of them in there. And so please, if you would like to have one of those cookbooks, just help yourself in there to that. We're so thankful for this church, for all of you. If you didn't get a name tag and you're staying for church or lunch, please stop back here, and we've got name tags, so you don't have to guess at other people's names and like, what? Oh, it was Larry. Yes. And just make that easier. And then we'll have church, and then we'll be downstairs for lunch, and everybody's invited, whether you brought anything or not. I would also just tell you, Brenda and Larry were our pastors for a number of years as a clergy couple, and gave us part of the confidence to be able to do this as a clergy couple. Nobody would speak badly of Brenda or Leslie. And if I do anything wrong, I was trained by Larry. So, you just know where to put the credit for things. You had something.
I'm just going to give one more. The cookbook was Lamar's brainchild and baby. And he literally went through all the old cookbooks and mysteries we could find and pulled out old recipes. And we made the decision to leave in some of the old terms and languages. So when you see a recipe that says add sour milk, you young people are going to have to Google it to find out what that is. Oreo, stuff like that. But it was a labor of love, and I just have to say thank you so much.
Let me make one statement relative to that cookbook. There is a group of recipes that we use the term departed saints. And they're listed, a picture of the ladies or guys, their birth date and death date. We struggled to get this one in, but there's a jam cake recipe from Lucy and Mary McCampbell. You have to be around here for a while to know who those ladies were. But they were born in the 1870s. There is a soft sugar cookie recipe from Bertha Dunn, who was the youngest child of those folks in that middle window. She was born in 1895, 4 years after the church was established. Then there's another recipe from a lady called Flossie Tipton. Flossie lived just past the cemetery on the right in that white weatherboarded house. She was born in the 1800s. So there's three contributors whose birth date was in the 1800s. There's a group of folks that was born between 1900 and 1925 or so. So there are some old folks. But Leslie's comment about soured milk, she called me one day and said, this thing says, it says add the milk, but there's no milk here. Well, what it was sour cream. Well, the intent wasn't to go to the grocery store and buy a carton of sour cream. That was cream that had been soured. Because there was no refrigerated grocery stores when that recipe was written.
Thank you so much, Lamar.
Yes.
It is a labor of love.
We'll adjourn now. I will say there's a unisex bathroom on this floor right back here, and then downstairs there's both the ladies and men's room as well. And if you haven't been here in a while, go see the men's room because it's been completely renovated. So, thank you.
Be careful of the step.
Yes.
Going back here, if you don't want steps, you can go through some prayer.
No, thank you so much.
Pat, we need